Welcome to Self-Perfected.
Cool.
Hello,
What's
we're
up?
back. Another
Yeah.
installment. Before we get into it, I just want to say thank you, C God, for my new nickname.
Rad
I was
Dad.
christened on Facebook, Rad Dad. Rad Dad's back with a new mug. Dad mug.
I
Is
love
this implying that I'm a tool?
it.
There is
Rad-
that subtle subconscious
Rad Dad's not a
suggestion.
tool.
Hey, let me
Rad
ask you
Dad
guys a
is
question. When
cool.
somebody says, I don't know, is that a term you guys ever used? Because you're like a little bit younger than me. So that was like a term people used a lot when I was growing up.
I don't
You're
hear
a
it too
tool?
much.
That?
Like I've
Yeah,
I've
like,
heard
that guy's a
it for
tool.
sure.
100%.
I've heard
I used
it,
to
Like,
use
can
that
you
all the time.
okay?
but like people
Christine's
don't
like
use it.
clear on it. What does it mean? Because I always heard that, and I always heard it applied to a certain type of person. What would you? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess somebody who's kind of being a goof to some degree, or
A goof.
yeah,
I would say a dick. I think
A
a tool is
tool?
like
but maybe like an
you're being a
arrogant,
tool.
an arrogant goof.
Yes. And
What do you mean by
I don't know
goof?
about goof. Yeah.
Depends on what you mean by that.
Because I'm just like thinking back to when I was in like middle school or high school, being like, man, that guy's such a tool, you know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
almost like a poser too. That's like coming to mind.
Okay,
too.
yeah. Like I'm thinking it
Mm.
was like the person that you judged as. It's like actually there's a subtle jealousy too, right? It's like they might have had like a really nice car. They probably have nice clothes. They probably had like a nice haircut, but also like they were kind of not. They didn't have like a pleasing personality. They were
Yeah.
kind of like a little bit of standoffish or a dick or like over the top in an aggressive, dominant kind of way, slightly. But maybe they weren't like the person everyone aspired to. But it
Yeah.
was like they were trying really hard. It seemed like that was the judgment. It's like
Mm.
that's. I'm just looking at what my judgments were
I think
back
the
when I was.
trying really hard was hitting the nail on the head.
Like
Yeah.
what's
See, but what does that mean when we say someone's trying really hard? Isn't that just a judgment? Because it's like you don't know how hard they're trying. Like maybe it's like really easy for them.
what was that movie? What was that movie with Christian Bale where he's like the card stock and all that shit? You know what I'm talking about? He's got like his
American
hair.
Psycho.
That's it. Yeah, that one. He's a tool. He's a tool. That's what I think of. When I think
See,
of a
why is
tool.
it called a tool? Because like a tool is like something that's useful for a purpose, right? It's like has a.
Because
I'm gonna
of it,
look it up.
I'm thinking
gonna
of
look
it like
up.
a prick. I'm thinking of it like it's got the same kind of implications, like he's a dick.
But it's like if they're just a jerk,
yeah.
like okay, like if there was some hillbilly with like, bare feet and overalls and like an old beat up pickup truck, and then they like were mean to you, you wouldn't be like, wow, what a tool.
You know what? You're right. It's somebody who usually has like some sort of money or some sort of status. You
You know
know?
what? We should look up
See, but
Urban Dictionary.
When I look it up, it says, it's someone. Oh no, it says fool. It must have autocorrected.
Wait a minute.
I know,
Anyone-
but then it
Tool.
says, but then it says tool. But then it says tool. So it says
Uh-huh.
fool, but then it says tool. So I think it meant to say tool. It's just
Okay.
type it. It says, see, but this is kind of more what it seems like it should mean. It's saying like it's someone who lacks the capacity to realize they're being used by someone else. I mean, that seems obvious, but that's definitely
Yeah.
not how we used it when we were in school.
No.
Okay, so the Urban Dictionary, because that's where you get all these definitions
Yeah.
from. Anyone
Yeah.
who tries to act cooler than they actually are. Most tools
That's
are
it.
usually douchebags with negative self-esteem. Wow, Dane Cook is not funny at all. What an asshole. Damn, you're right. What a tool.
Okay. I I can see that one.
Yeah, okay. He kind of embodies his persona, his comedian persona embodies that point of like somebody who, but it's like, but this point of like they're cooler than they actually they acting cooler than they are.
Yeah.
Really makes you that wonder, what does the word cool mean? Like it's just whether you accept them as that, because usually the cool person, like when you were in school, remember, right? The cool person just seemed like they didn't care about
Yeah.
their status.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like the tool cares about the status, like it's important to them. Maybe that's where the low self-esteem part is.
Ah, that
Right?
makes
It's
sense.
like you care about the status, it's important to you. You're always doing things to prove your status rather than it just coming to you naturally. So it's interesting because that's the trying hard part, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, so what does that imply that we're valuing when we judge the person who's the tool, but not the cool person who's like just they're like nonchalant about it.
It implies we're
Like,
valuing
okay,
like not trying and well, obviously there's to some extent valuing that they don't care about you or care about your opinion, but it goes even further to like they just don't care.
isn't that weird? It's like we're judging the person who seems to care about our opinion, but we're actually spending time thinking about
because
that.
we're judging.
We do actually
all judgment is self-judgment. Okay?
But like, oh, but you shouldn't care about other people's opinions. But you're literally there judging the other person about
Right.
being a tool. So it's like you're just as much a tool in that. Like, so I mean, really think about it. We're all tools because our mind is just using us. Our ego is just using us.
Okay, so here's
but apparently
something.
It's a very misused term. Go ahead.
Here's something that I realized this last few days, right? And it was just a point that I'd already looked into and saw, but it was more clear today, or not today, but over the last few days, because I was watching this Tim Pool. He was talking about it wasn't Tim Pool. No, you're right, Tim Tool. Tool time with Tim. But no, actually it wasn't Tim Pool. It was the Quack brothers. I think it's Quack. I forget how to pronounce
Quack.
their name. Quack. Yeah.
They're just a couple of quacks.
Yeah, those quacks. But they were talking about basically the digital currency that the US is trying to create here, and that's already going on in other countries.
CBDC.
Yeah, whatever.
I always keep talking about like a cannabis dispensary.
Yeah, right. CBDC,
CBD oil or some shit. I'm like, the government's doing what now?
But he was talking about how like, some of the programs that they're implementing, in order to reduce inflation, they would just take money out of your account because they would have control over it, and they could put an expiration date.
They would be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like all the points that he was going through about this new CBDC, whatever, like digital controlled by the government currency, would basically make it so that your money is like at the whim of whatever the government wants. They could freeze your account, they could take your money, they could make you like poor in a moment, however they feel like they're doing it, right? And so he was also bringing up this point of the retirement funds, which it's so interesting. I remember like 4 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that.
When you retired?
I remember when I retired. But no, I remember you and Avery were talking about and sending me videos on how the retirement funds that people have right now are not secure because various things going on in the market, but inflation, et cetera, and how basically the biggest problem at that time that could be seen, this was again before COVID and all that, the biggest problem that could be seen was that we had this older generation that was much larger than the younger generations that would have to support their retirement funds, right? And so like just realizing, oh, the whole reason why retirement has worked thus far is because we had a huge generation of baby boomers that were all paying into it that could support all the other people. But now at this moment, it's like now all of those baby boomers would be taking out money, and that would be a huge problem because not the same amount of money is going into it.
Yeah.
It's not sufficient, right?
It's like all those baby boomers are about to retire and suddenly a bigger draw. They should call this generation the baby busters.
I love it. And it's crazy because if you think about it, all these people have been told have less kids. People are being told not to have any kids, for the environment, all this shit, but it's actually working against them because now, like, how are they supposed to pay for their retirement that they worked so hard for?
It's almost like we're just a society of tools.
Damn, bro.
Being played for someone. I mean, it's like when you hear the term like controlled demolition, and I ain't talking 9/11. Dude, I love that meme that Mitch sent.
Yeah, the one that's like
Mitch, right?
Never forget.
And so the
And
two
then-
hold on, let's set up. It's the
Yeah,
two
yeah, yeah.
towers, and then you see tower 7, the smaller one, right? And then it
Yeah.
says never forget on the first two, and then it says forget. Forget on the tower 7.
It's so good. It's so good.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But
the-
controlled my point was like because like what's his name? Glenn Beck said this. The first time I heard him say it was when I went to that Louis Gohmert's birthday bash,
Mhm.
like here in like kind of in a town near me. We went to like this birthday fundraiser thing he did, and it was crazy. Like it was supposed to be some Fox News anchor speaking, and then like something happened with their schedule. She couldn't be there, and then like we're in the VIP, like just it's like a smaller room where you could talk to him beforehand, because the person I was invited with or that invited me was had paid or whatever. And the door opens, and then I'm like, that's Glenn Beck. And he just like comes in, just like, oh, casually, like talking to everybody, going around saying hi to everybody. And he was like super chill. Like it was crazy. Like he was not what you would imagine somebody in that position would act like.
like
He was just
pompous
like,
or like a tool.
no, yeah, he was totally just like normal. Like it was really interesting. Anyways, and then I heard him speak, and I never really, I don't want to say liked, but it's just I never really got the appeal of Glenn Beck before. And then especially during like the Trump thing, he was like super anti-Trump in the beginning, and then like kind of changed his thought pattern about Trump and everything. And he was the guy who like put his face in a bowl of Cheeto dust on air to like make some point about him being orange or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. That's
Anyways, it was
hilarious.
just really cool. I'm giving way too much context, but the point is he brought up this point of like we're watching a controlled no, he called it like a managed collapse of the country. Like he's like the people and this was at the time when they had withdrawn out of Afghanistan, remember, and left all those tanks and people there. And he was like, there's people like being left on the ground, they can't get out. He's like, he tried to bring planes over, and they wouldn't let the planes take off with people in it, and they had all these bullshit rules and stuff. And so and then I've heard Tim Pool very recently saying that same phrase. It's like managed collapse, or they might use a different phrase, but it's like that same concept.
Yeah.
So it just made me think of that when you were bringing up that point of like the pensions and all this stuff. It's like everything is being done in a way to implode because why is the propaganda there about having less kids, right?
Okay. Go ahead. All right. So check this out, because I was talking with someone yesterday, and I saw this point as well of like, okay, so the average person, it cannot read past the 4th grade level here in America, right?
And the average person's 3 years old. No, I'm kidding. I know what you mean. Average adult. Yes.
Average adult, average Americans not reading past the 4th grade level. And then the point of like, you guys showed, you and Katie and Max showed what 4th grade math is, right? The average adult cannot do that. They cannot. I know, because I talk to a lot of adults, and
you ask them and they're like, they start shutting down. You're like, this is simple shit, man. My 5-year-old can do it.
Okay. One day, on one of your videos, one of your lives, long time ago, you made this point of like, if you were to say to somebody, hey, if you paid this much in tax on this purchase, what was the original price of the purchase, and what did you pay? If you paid this much and the tax was 10%, what was the original price, right? You said something to that effect, right? People cannot do that. They cannot, like, as soon as it's got this percent, oh fuck, oh fuck, no. I gotta work backwards too. No, I can't do it. And it's super simple, obviously, to do, right? But the average person can't put that together. Okay, I'm not done making my point. Wait.
Okay,
so
give us some more. Give us the juice, man.
So because our problems that we face in this world are beyond a 4th grade level, think about the elite or someone with the intelligence of like a Bill Gates, or someone who can see the problem of, holy fuck, we have all these baby boomers. They put in all this money. That's what was supporting all this. We do not have enough money to support all the baby boomers. Okay, we're going to have to orchestrate something, because we can't just say, hey, we have a huge problem. Baby boomers, you're not getting paid. Sorry.
And where is their money coming from?
Yeah. Where is it? Okay, there you go.
Because it's all 401k shit, and it's literally just the stock market.
Right. Which is all being manipulated anyway. So it's like, hey, the last 60 years that you spent paying into this, sorry, right? Like if they were to do that, everybody would be up in arms, right? And so controlled demo time.
Up in wheelchairs.
My cane can't go that high.
They'd be taking their masks off and burning down police precincts.
Right. So okay. So we need an
Black Lives
explanation.
Matter, but it's just old people. It's just like these old people like going down the streets like, no justice, no peace, you know.
I gotta take a nap. But
instead of taking a knee, take a nap.
Imagine before every football game, everyone just takes a nap. Just that would really upset people, I think. But yeah, it's the same point of like whenever there's a reset in funds, meaning like we have these mini resets, we have bigger resets, recessions, depressions. Anytime we have a reset like that, there needs to be something to explain that reset. And then we have like a war, and that war explains away, hey, you know, obviously we had to shrink the economy because of the war. You guys know, well, we just had a reset for the COVID, right? It's like that, which explains away a lot of shit. Oh,
come on. It's not like they would call it a reset.
You know, I had this book. It's in the other room, but it's called COVID-19.
That's a conspiracy theory. Reset. The Great Reset is a conspiracy theory. And you're like, it's literally the guy who wrote the book who we're talking about called it that.
Yeah.
And he said it was about COVID. And they're like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. You're like,
you can't read.
You know, conspiracy theory was invented by the CIA to demean any theories.
Well, that's a conspiracy
theory. From having theories.
That's a conspiracy theory. Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's a conspiracy theory. Yeah.
It sounds conspiratorial.
No, like when they wrote up the memo for it, they're like, we're going to come up with this term. We've tested it. It works. Conspiracy theory. It's going to stop people from when people try to come up, you know, have theories about things that are going on, we're going to just call it that. It'll shut the discussion down. They're like, and our first one we're going to test it on is this memo right here. Okay. So this is gonna be our first conspiracy theory, is this, where we come up with the term conspiracy theory.
Pretty genius. Whoever came up with it, I gotta give them kudos. It's pretty fucking intelligent, you know.
It's probably Queen Elizabeth. That's why they had to take her out.
She's about to go to her deathbed and squeal everything. They're just
seriously, like, she was about to spill the beans on Epstein, on the Clintons, on the Great Reset. She was coming out with Queen coin to like free the people. She had access to all the gold that was from 9/11. She was like what's the word? Storing it for everybody, right? Keeping it back, right?
Yeah.
So they had to take her out, man.
Of course. But okay.
Was your first thought when you heard that the Queen died that maybe it was COVID?
My first thought was to tell Christine, Freddie Mercury's been dead for a while, and so
been died.
Oh man, I saw a funny meme like that. It was Joe Biden. He was writing a letter to like the family of the Queen. They were like, "Sorry for your loss. Like, I really enjoyed Bohemian Rhapsody. I like to listen to it all the time."
That's hilarious. Did you see they put these two clips together? It was like the clip of Joe Biden saying, I was going to say Joe Rogan, Joe Biden saying the biggest threat, or the MAGA Republicans are a threat to our democracy, right? And then the next clip, somebody asking him, a reporter asking him, like, are all Trump supporters a threat to our democracy? And he's like, I don't think any Trump supporters are a threat to our democracy. It's just like these clips were taken within 24 hours of each other.
See, because they're trying to argue like, no, we were just talking about like those extreme Congress people or whatever. It's like, okay, so you're literally just attacking your political rivals, so that makes it worse. Second of all, who do you think is voting for them? Yeah. So it's like, it's so obvious, like this rhetoric that's designed to polarize.
Okay, but to finish my point on the Quack brothers, the CBDC.
Oh, the Quacks.
Yeah.
Oh, real quick, that reminds me, I need to send you this one of the Texas boys. You know those? Have you seen some of those? Mm-hmm. They have one where they talk about some of this managed collapse stuff. I'm just reminding myself to tell you.
Okay.
I'll send it to you
when you listen to this later. then you'll remember to send it to me.
Yes.
But the CBDC, they were making all these points of how, okay, everything they're doing is actually going to hurt people. Like even with all these people who've saved up all this money with in one currency, and now they're being told, no, you have to use this other currency, and there's an expiration date on your currency, so you can't just live out the rest of your life on, you know, however much million you saved up. You know, it's like, oh no, you've only got 6 years to use up all this money. It's like, what's the point of having a retirement fund anyway then, right? And they were looking at
You're gonna have to stop at Cracker Barrel just like one less time on their RV trip around the Grand Canyon. I really feel for them.
Damn it, Barbara!
Also,
I told you not to order
like,
the bacon.
The idea of working for 60 years for like all your life to be able to have a basically subsistence living when you retire for like the last whatever 20 years of your life, it's like, it's such a scam.
You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Animal Farm. You remember Animal Farm, like at the end?
Dude, I have an Animal Farm.
You do. You've got the pigs.
First of all, it never ends.
Are the pigs taking over?
The pigs are taking over. They're like kicking you out. They're like, fuck these capitalists. Yeah.
Well, what I had to do is I had to stop them spreading their trans fucking bullshit to all the chickens. Because I'm telling you, I'm not joking. We had hens that I would swear they were hens. Now it's a rooster. I'm like,
oh.
Sometimes maybe they just developed late and it wasn't obvious. But Katie kept saying, no, it's definitely a rooster. I'm like, that's not a rooster. And then eventually I'm like, oh yeah, that's a rooster. Because, you know, they have like the longer tail feathers, the bigger comb. But like for a while, I just really thought it was just a hen. That like to fuck other hens, you know.
I think Katie's maybe better at, you know, seeing gender than you are. Yeah.
This is the problem. I don't see gender. I don't see color.
Oh, there it is. That's really nice.
I thought there was something wrong with my monitor. There's just black and white, but it's just because I don't see color.
That's pretty funny. That's good. But okay.
Quacks.
So yeah, they basically just said in the original documents, or when the president said, hey, I'm setting forth a task for the US government to do research into this digital currency for the benefit of Americans, right? And you know, that would be in the best interest of Americans, right? He made this point of highlighting that and saying, you know, this says in the best interest of Americans, but obviously if you look at all the points, it's not in the best interest of American people. So what they're saying when they say in the best interest of Americans is really in the best interest of the American government, which is like, you know, something that I think everyone can identify with. Governments all around the world are always seeking more power for themselves. They're always seeking, like, all the rules that they implement doesn't actually help the people. It's all about more power for the government.
Dude, think about that. Like when they say our democracy.
Yeah, it's not.
They're saying their ability to manipulate the masses into voting them in power. That's what they really, I mean, clearly that's what they're actually doing, whether they mean it that way.
So check it out. Here's what I saw more clearly with that. This point of like, what is government? What is it? The actual root of government? It's like govern. Ment is mind, right? Govern the mind, control the mind, right? The mind is like the government of the physical body or the being, right? Where it's like consolidating more and more power and believing itself to be the representative of the whole. Does that make sense? You following? Yeah. It's like when we're talking about like, there is a purpose. And I want to be clear. There is a purpose for the government, right? But the purpose is supposed to be to actually do what the people are asking for, like actually carry out those duties, the responsibility of like, hey, we as the people see that this would be best for all of us, and the government has the duty then to, or ideally, right? The government has the duty to.
But think about this, like people think that, you're supposed to elect government officials and they're supposed to do the will of the people. Like the people are supposed to tell them what to do and change the laws, and then they're supposed to go do that.
Supposed to.
But that's like saying, okay, like think about it. As a parent, I'm there to do the will of my children.
Mhm.
Now you could interpret that as whatever they tell me to do, I have to do it, or I'm there to take responsibility and make sure they have an amazing life, get a proper education, they have
Right.
all the things that they need, and then no one can harm them. They're safe, but they have freedom, and
Right.
they'll be able to be creative, and that no one can hurt. So imagine as the ideal parent, if the government looked at it that way, like the will of the people should not be the whim of the people. Do you see what I'm saying? But the government doesn't actually do the will of the people, because the will of the people is just to have the best life. It's not the particular, that doesn't mean that the people shouldn't have any say in terms of laws. I'm just saying I don't think we should interpret it as like, because if you play that game, then what you're saying is if a majority of people do agree that you can be trans and that you should have gender affirming healthcare, then that's the will of the people. Everyone should have to go along with it, and that should be the laws. But that's not like what's actually best, whether the people agree with it or not. It's like whether my kids agree with it or not, they need proper nutrition.
Here's
Now,
the
my
challenge
goal
that I
is
see with
to
that.
support them in a way to understand why they need it, but I'm not going
Yeah.
to just be like, well, until they fully understand why they need proper nutrition, they can just eat whatever they want because it's their choice. And it's like, but they'll never get to the point of understanding them because they'll have fucking brain damage.
Here's the challenge that I see with that is that you could argue right now the government does see itself as a parent who is like doing what's best for the people, but it's like,
But they're not actually operating from the principle of what is best for all.
that's true.
So they are the will of the people, whether you like it or not. They represent the will of the people.
Mhm.
What is the will of the people right now? The will of the people right now is lack of self-directiveness, lack of self-responsibility, lack of blame. I mean, not lack of blame, but actual blame, fear, survival,
Abundance of
basic
blame.
points like that. Right.
Yeah.
Competition.
Yeah.
Like everyone buys into it. Look how many people play the lottery.
Yeah.
Right. Look how many people want to be at the top just so that they could be at the top, not because they would do anything differently.
Right.
Right. So the government represents that will. It is just a reflection of that will.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So
Yeah.
the reason why it can't be otherwise is because who's in the fucking government?
The same people that you and I would be.
Right. Well, it's not that you and I would be. It's just that collectively, that's the will. That's like they're no different than anybody else. Now, what are we saying? We have an actual process that we have committed ourselves to change those elements within ourselves, to put ourselves on track of what is best for all, and to always be evaluating things from that perspective until the point where in ourselves individually, we trust ourselves. We know, not trust as in a hope, but an actual seeing the application of it, that we make decisions that are best for everybody in the context of our influence. That's the point. And then, so when you get to the position of now we're in the government, we've already proven to ourselves that we can trust ourselves to do the decisions that are best. So then it's not about, okay, I'm in government. Now, what does everybody want? It's like, I already know what we all want. And it's in the context of what's best for all, because I'm a human being like everybody else, and I've changed myself. And so I'm not going to be like, okay, wow, we have a lot of axe murderers this year. What kind of things do you guys want? You know, we don't want to we want to make sure they're represented. I mean, they have their opinions too, guys. Oh, the pedos. What's y'all's opinions? What do you think that the age of consent should be?
Listen, we're calling them maps now. Okay. Maps.
Right. So people would say, like, people would be upset that I would say the government doesn't represent the whim of the people. It's not about people's choice, and they don't have the right to just choose anything willy-nilly. It's like, but then you wouldn't have a problem restricting that choice for a pedophile or a murderer. So if you can just purify yourself and extend yourself into yourself, all of the points of like what are actually not best, then you wouldn't have a problem with any decision the government would make if it was operating from that same principle.
Yeah.
The problem is us projecting and going, but that's not how it operates. They're human nature. They're just like everybody else. Like, yeah, so you haven't changed yourself yet. Because if you're one of the first ones to change, then what's your responsibility now?
Well, to get others to see it as well.
But to be that one that's doing the higher level point.
with that too. Yeah.
Because you're thinking, well, but it's not going to change in the government because those people are still going to be fucked. Right. So if
Right.
you're the first one that changes, then what do you have to do?
You have to do it. Yeah. That's
But
right.
then at that point, you wouldn't be arguing from the perspective of, yeah, but everybody else is so fucked. We just have to give everybody what they want and their own choice and all that stuff. Like,
No, because you would have changed.
it's like, it's so interesting because people would say you have to, you should have freedom of choice. We have freedom of choice. Everyone has free choice. Like you should choose whatever it is that you want and say, well, but unless you hurt anybody. But how many people are willing to go to the extent of what it actually means to harm somebody? You know, and how does harm extend out over generations based on systematic points that
Yeah.
then automate points? So you know, I'm not harming anybody,
Yeah.
but it's like, but I'm participating in a system that's constantly doing harm, whether it's through omission or on purpose, you know, in different ways.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say it's just like, you know, if you look at because I've been seeing a lot of these stories of like detransitioners, right? And it's so interesting seeing their perspective of what's going on within them, you know, and it's like Christina and I have talked about it quite a bit where they're sharing things that are quite relatable to virtually everyone, where someone started out their story saying, I am so obsessed with the way that people perceive me, like this character of how others perceive them. And they were saying how, you know, they were basically influenced in some way because they had this inadequacy within themselves, which is okay. To go to the extent of what is harm, this is what I'm answering, right? What is harm? It's like everyone has been given this sense of inadequacy within them. Like if you are dark skinned, you go through public school system, you're going to learn about slavery, and it's done in this way where it's almost like you feel like you identify with the burden of slavery on you. It's as if like you were a slave, or your parents were a slave, or your grandparents were, somebody in your family was a slave, and you should feel bad about it.
It's like they're deliberately presenting it in a, or it's presented in a way where the effect of it is you actually develop low self-esteem because
Right.
of your skin color,
Exactly.
rather than it having the opposite of effect, which is what they would claim is the purpose of it.
Right. And so the other thing then is what happens is, you know, everyone to some extent feels within them like being made to feel less than whole, right? And so this is happening on so many different levels, but you think it, or a lot of people feel like it's unique to them. And it's just them because you see somebody on social media, you see all these people on social media, they're living the good life or whatever. And so it's like, oh, it's just me who feels this way. But then when you see somebody else who is less than whole, like for instance, you know, somebody like what's being pushed very loudly is, hey, you know, it's not fair that these people don't get these rights because they're oppressed, you know, in whatever way, whether they're gay or trans or a certain color of skin, whatever, right? Like, then it kind of calls out to that part within each person that's like, oh, well, I should let them get what they want so that maybe I might feel whole too, you know, something to that effect. And the extent of harm that's being done is people are given solutions. Someone was telling me how when they were a teen, they went on to like these forums online, and they were saying, you know, that they were feeling depressed, they were feeling this, that, whatever. And the people that were on these forums would message them and say, well, had you considered you're trans? You know, you're probably trans because you don't feel good in your body, all this stuff. You know, what you should do is go get some medication right away, or ask your doctor for some medication right away. And, you know, I'll support you and I'll send you. Yeah.
I want to add something to that real quick, that point about feeling good with your body. I was just looking at what that really means, because we always assume, I always assume it means when a person says that, they're like, you know, I feel more like a girl, I don't feel like a guy, you know?
Okay.
But I think that aspect of it is more of a suggested thing that was suggested to them at some level. Whereas in reality, they just don't feel good.
Right. It's like,
Does that make sense? Like,
yes.
I get up in the morning and I feel like you feel hungover, you feel bad, you feel irritated, you feel anxious, you feel all these other things.
Right.
And then you're being suggested at some level. It's like what you're saying. It's because you're actually a man, but you're trapped in a woman. That's where the discomfort's coming from.
Exactly. And so because of that, because that's
dude, and think about it. All the propaganda about making it like men are more powerful and all this stuff plays into it. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so
it's like, oh, that's why I feel powerless.
That's the extent of harm that I'm saying. Is like, okay, you put out all this propaganda or messaging of men are toxic and they're powerful and they're keeping everybody down and all this, or white people are oppressive, they're evil, they're keeping all the minorities down, or, you know, you could just keep going on and on and on with name your villain or whatever, right? Which is it's so funny. I like that word villain. I looked into the origin of that word, and villain, it was actually a derogatory term for villagers, right? Like it stems from a villager. And you're just basically saying like, like it was a term from the elite to say like, yeah, these fucking villains, they want all this shit and we have to take care of them.
Like it almost sounds like the word gremlin, like these gremlins, these
yeah,
these
right?
little.
But the point being, the harm that's being done is so, it's like, if you actually look into it, at what point would you call lying to a child harm? Right? Because if you're going to lie about Santa Claus, you're going to lie about where you're hiding the sweets, you're going to lie about, like, at what point are you going to realize you're actually doing harm to that child? You're going to lie about, you can be whatever you want to be. Like you can be Superman and jump off the roof. Well, if that child listens to you and jumps off the roof, you're harming that child because you didn't help them to actually understand physical reality. You know that they're not capable of like actually reasoning that out for themselves because they don't have all that information yet. They don't have the development yet.
Reason.
Exactly.
You just lied to them the whole time. You told them stuff that didn't make sense. So their development of reasoning was based on all this stuff that doesn't make sense. So they can't reason.
Right. Exactly. And so
we have a whole generation of people growing up on Harry Potter. And even though we know it's not real, that becomes the way in which we emotionally reason within ourselves of like fantasy and this is going to be magic and all the, and like the superheroes and the Disney and all this shit. So then something like trans and I can just change my body and then I'll feel good. It just fits into that reasoning process.
Right.
It's like you're the little mermaid who got the legs. Exactly.
And so, okay, literally last night we were watching this video where there was these, this guy was like, I don't understand why you got to make Little Mermaid black. Like you're ruining, you know, the story or whatever. And then right after that, it's like all these clips of young Black girls mostly and some little Black boys going, she's black. Oh, she looks like me. Oh, and like really inspiring from one perspective, right? But Christina and I looked at it and independently, we both had the same thought of like, that's so sad. That's so sad that these children are looking at these characters of like these fake characters made by Disney or by whomever. And like, they feel some identification with that character. Like, why is that so valued by our society of like, oh yes, because they need someone to identify with. A fucking mermaid, they're identifying with a creature that's not real, that's like got all this bullshit weaved into it as well. That's like clearly, and the problem is that these children are going to grow up with this identity in their mind and all the extra shit that's weaved into it. And that's how they learn to reason. That's how they learn to communicate with the world around them. It's based on, well, I'm a little mermaid, or I'm a princess, or I'm, you know, Prince Charming or whatever. I'm Spider-Man. And so Spider-Man, well, how would he deal with this? And like, but it's on such an unconscious level. And then like, there's all the drama that goes into these movies as well that is really just,
yeah, but it also just goes to show like it's because I was telling Drake, I was like, okay, so when Mulan came out, all the little Asian girls were like, wow, she's just like me, and like identifying with Mulan, for example. I'm like, no, it's so obvious that now it's like this idea and ideology is being imprinted on people. Like, look at what, you know, the mainstream media, and look at all the movies and everything. It's like our culture is never like included, or they're never inclusive enough. And
like,
look
how,
now, look what, so it's like now it's you, like, you know, that this little girl is not getting these ideas from her just like looking at Little Mermaid on screen that's black. It's
exactly.
like obviously someone
Isn't
put
the
this in her
point
mind.
like,
To what extent
but
do you
also-
have to be like feeling inferior or inadequate or low self-esteem that, you know, when you see the hero looks like you're like, oh yes, you know, like it's
you know, that whole thing about Obama, it's like because he became president, now black people have higher self-esteem, they can be president. It's like,
Yeah.
so what
but
is
you
the
can't
aim
be
here?
president.
You also can't be a mermaid.
It's just bullshit.
You can't be a mermaid. Why do we need black kids to be like, I could be a mermaid? And look, I like Matt Walsh's take. He was like, she doesn't need to be white or black. She needs to be a sea creature with translucent skin where you can like see her skull. It's like, because she's a deep sea creature. Like that would be fucking interesting if she was terrifying looking. Like also, what is the fucking pattern of the story exactly?
She gives up her voice to get legs,
so she can meet a man.
What black? Okay, they're like, if you give her black skin, the black kids will relate to her. Guess what? She was raised by her father. So you got a lot. If you're trying to make it relatable to black kids, first of all, so I don't know why they didn't have a problem with that. Second of all, what's the fucking story?
Yeah.
Like her mom is dead or not in the picture or something. She swam off with another fish. I don't know. And she just wants to be in another world.
Yeah.
And she has to somehow wish and hope and no, what is it? She like makes a bargain with some fucking sorceress, right?
Yeah.
Ursula, to give her the ability to be on land.
Yeah.
So what, like, imagine as a parent, you're like, I want my child to be able to identify with that. So you want the connection to this fantasy story where the patterning is actually not helpful at all to be even stronger.
Yeah.
You want the child to identify even more with this idea.
Like,
what is the fucking idea that, like, if you considered everything you expose your child to is forming a part of their education, why is this lesson important?
Right.
No one thinks of it like that. If you're going to show this thing to your child, why is this important for them? And it's like, okay, if it's a one-off thing, like once that month they watch something entertaining that didn't have anything negative with it, okay, it doesn't everything have to be you're trying to teach them something. But yeah. I mean, fuck, why not consider it that way? Why not consider like you're going to put them in school for 8 hours a day?
Yeah.
You obviously understand the importance of educating them, but then you're going to not take any responsibility whatsoever for the lessons you're teaching them through. Think about this. Which do you think is more impressionable on a child? Watching The Little Mermaid or sitting in school?
Watching The Little Mermaid 100%. 100%.
They can remember the whole fucking song and everything.
And they'll watch it. They'll watch it 10 times in a row. Children will watch a movie 10 times in a row and not feel any less excitement the 10th time.
They're learning from that 100 times more than they're learning from school.
Yes.
And you're probably exposing to them like way younger.
Yeah.
See, like with our kids, we're not interested in, okay, Max, Seneca, you can do math because a white guy was able to do math. We're like, here's math. Here's how it works. Here's what the words mean. That's it. There's no end of discussion. You don't need to have examples of people that look like you, because to think that you have to look like the person in order for you to be able to do it kind of misses the point of what it's actually about, because it's got nothing to do with how you look.
And that also kind of reminds me like how your kids will pretend all the time, all these different characters, but they're not like identifying as this person, like, oh wow, this person represents me or anything like that. They're like, okay, today I'm a robot. I'm a fucking robot. And like, I'm doing these math, like their way of pretending or like, being another character has nothing to do with their personal identity, you know? And at the
It's
same,
just that they're taking on all of the information in their environment and they're playing with it creatively. Just like when
yeah,
you dream, your
yeah,
dreams use the content of what you've seen. And so the parents are not taking responsibility for like, what are you giving them as the content for them to be creative with? It's like when little
yeah,
kids play and you see them like doing all these like fights and arguments and all this stuff. It's like, that's not how our kids play.
yeah.
Like
Like,
they don't play like that. You've seen it. Like they don't play in the same way most kids play. It's like they have a different starting point within what they're playing.
dude, I remember this was years and years ago, but we used to have these doll houses at our daycare, and little dolls and everything. And there would be kids, this would happen all the time. Kids would be playing with the doll houses and their parents would be like in the other room or whatever. Or their parents would have already dropped them off, whatever the case was. But the kids would be playing with the dolls in the dollhouse, and just it would be arguments. No, daddy says you can't do that and you're in trouble. And like it would be like
She's
you
like,
could
I
see
found your phone. Who the fuck is Cindy? You talking to this bitch? No, what are you looking at my phone for? You can't look at my phone.
essentially that was essentially it. That was essentially what was going on. It was just like you could see the problems that were going on in their home just based on how the kids play, you know? And it's so interesting because I remember when I was a kid, the way I would read books, like I would pretend to be those characters, but it was like the character might have been, I don't know. I don't know what the character actually looked like. I was reading a book. So it's like it was part of my imagination. Maybe they might have described the character like in the book or whatever, their physical features, but it didn't really matter. It's not the same kind of like, this is the image of Ariel, and this is what it has to be and forever. And like, and now you either identify with that because it's black or it's white or whatever the fuck it is. Right. Like it's like you said, parents are exposing their kids to this propaganda on such a scale that they're mad when the propaganda doesn't fully grab their child in.
It's like it was propaganda the whole time. It's like, you know who wasn't mad about Little Mermaid being black? It's like it's one thing to be like, oh, you're recognizing it as it is just another point of the propaganda. But it's like, guess what? We weren't going to watch Little Mermaid even if she was white. We weren't watching the Little Mermaid when she was a cartoon. My kids
Right.
don't even know about Little Mermaid. They know about mermaids. They understand the concept of what a mermaid is. They've heard about
Right.
Disney. They understand what it is, but they're not fucking being impulsed. But we
Right.
like, it's like, oh, now they've just become woke. And it's like, actually, one of my neighbors was talking about this or 2 days ago. He was like, talking about, oh, you hear about this Disney? They gone woke. And I was like, well, look, I was like, we weren't doing Disney even before that.
Yeah.
I said, look at the stuff that we grew up on. He's older than me. And I was like, I grew up watching Ninja Turtles and G.I. Joes and all kinds of trash. And like, that wasn't best. My kids don't watch that stuff either. They don't watch any of
Yeah.
that stuff. Like whether it was from my childhood, it's like, you think that, oh, now it's like, it's woke. So it's bad. And it's like, dude, whatever it was before, I mean, we talk
Yeah.
about this a lot, like the princess impulsing and the prince charming and all the fucking effect that has on children and so forth. And like looking for your Prince Charming. And
Yeah.
we're not fucking watching Disney and all that shit in the first place. And the thing is, you see it because like the kids will go to the store and they might see something and they're interested in that because it's like constructed in a way where they know it attracts a child's attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you see how fucking, and we're not like, put that down. We don't do stuff like that. We're like, what is that? And they're like, oh, I think this is one of those Disney characters. I'm like, why do you say that? And they're like, oh, it's got Disney on it. Like, oh, what is that? And it's like, it's a mermaid. And it's like, okay, do you want to know about that story about the Little Mermaid? Let's talk about it. And we'll tell them what the story is. And like, what are the parts that are not best about it? And, and we talk about the fact that the stories about Disney, they always have one of the parents is dead or both parents are dead because they're trying to produce a traumatic response in the child.
Yeah.
And there's all these points that, so we can share that with our kids and explain it to them. So they're like, okay, cool. Now I know what that is. So we've satisfied their curiosity about, we're not like creating a mystery about it.
Yeah.
You understand?
We
can't
super emotional.
Oh, don't look at that.
That's
And then
the
they're
other
like,
thing.
oh, what is right? Can you expand on that?
Well, because it's just the fact of it being able to explain with logic and reason versus it being like like the best example is Drake when like you got exposed to sex and
Oh
then your
yeah.
mom made this like huge like emotional like because the kid that was like telling you about it or something, she was like, you can't come back here anymore, and then he was like
I remember this kid. He was older. He must have been like 10 or something. His name was like Wally. And she's like, no, Wally cannot come over anymore. It was a big deal. I was like, what's wrong with Wally? Wally's cool. But it was interesting because like I guess Wally was saying something sexual or whatever. We were hanging out by the pool, and like I knew Wally because he had a younger brother that I was hanging out with, and I must have been like, I don't know, 6 or 7 around that age. And then Wally was talking about sex, and I had no idea what it was. It didn't really register with me. But my mom made a big deal out of like, Wally cannot come back. He's bad influence, talking about sex and all this. And I was like, what is sex? Like now I'm interested. Now I'm like really fucking curious.
Now I really want to know what he was talking about. I want to talk to Wally. He fucking
Wally, what's up, dude? Tell me about this. What do you call it? Sex?
You got any more of those discussions?
anyways, when it's just super emotional, it's like then you get imprinted with it being this like huge deal, and or it's like a faux pas, you know what I mean, something that you just don't talk about, and that's then what your memory and definition is, versus it just being like, no, you can just take all of that out and just explain it, and then there's no emotional attachment to it or any sort of like oh my god or negativity attached to it, you know what I mean?
Right, because you're just going to create the opposite reaction in the
right.
point.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this Philip K. Dick book I'm reading right now, where they oh, by the way, we finished the last book in the robot series for Asimov.
Oh, nice.
That's pretty cool.
Nice.
And it actually touches on the point about programming yourself. It's pretty cool. I really highly suggest that series. But in this Philip K. Dick book, like it's this society where it's run by two groups that alternate in power, called the Unusuals and the New Men. And the New Men are super cognitively advanced. They had some evolution in this thing called the Rogers area of their brain. And the Unusuals have psychic abilities. So they kind of take turns being in power. And then everybody else is called old men. It's like you're just like normal human beings that didn't get that evolutionary point. So you're basically ruled by these people. And you can take a test. They have a test to identify which people are having the evolution, like children. And so they'll certify you as a new man, and then you can rise up in the levels of government and all this stuff, right? And in the book, there's like this father who's an old man, and he has a son, and he really wants him to test because he knows like, hey, this kid is different, like he's smart, and he knows he can qualify. So he always has him take the test, and he always fails. And so he won't. And so it's interesting because in the background, the guys are like, hey, should we let him pass this year? And they're like, no. Because like there's this conspiracy that they're actually trying to limit the amount of people who can be in it and all this stuff. So they're actually failing the kid on purpose. But it was really interesting because like there's obviously this elitist structure to society, right? And everything's very controlled. Like alcohol is totally outlawed, right? It's like death penalty if you get caught even buying it, right? There's like forced labor camps, all this kind of stuff. Typical Philip K. Dick book, right? But it was really, there's this one interesting point where the dad says like, it was like kind of like his inner thought process. And it was saying how he wants his son to just go ahead and pass and become a new man. So he can just go back. So he can just, basically continue accepting things the way they are. And I thought that was really interesting. It's like this point of, if I can just get my kid into the elite, then everything's okay. Because like you know everything is fucked. But that's just because you're on the losing side. And if you're like, if I could just get my kid in there, or if I could just be a billionaire, then they'll just be fine. And I see that it's like this desire of like, I don't actually want to change anything. I actually just want to benefit, and
I just want to win.
And like when I get there, I promise, then I will change everything.
Yeah.
It's like, no, dude, you know how long it takes to change? A long fucking time. When you're using the proper tools. Yeah. Right. And so it's like you can't just play it. Well, anyways, what else can I say? Right. It was just a really cool point because I saw that impulse within myself, within other people, where it's like, if I can just, it's like parents, like we were talking about a parent recently. And it's like they have their kids in school and everything, and they're like, my life isn't going well, but at least I'm getting my kids what they need and education and all this stuff, not realizing that their kids are going to be fucked just if they just go to school.
Right. Right. Because it's not changing anything actually for them. It's like, yeah,
it's like if I could just get them to be a doctor, and actually, you made this funny point about Mulan earlier about all the Asian parents. Like, you think they were like going, yes. And I'm thinking the parents are probably like, turn off the Mulan. You got to be a doctor. You don't fucking be a, it's like,
no, they're
probably like,
dinner.
fuck that. Like, no, you're going to be a doctor.
You can't sing
You
anyway.
will honor your father by being a doctor.
It's interesting because, okay, think about this conspiracy theory. Okay. Yeah. Think about this conspiracy theory. The immigrants, like the Indians, the Asians stuff, right? They come over and then they build like their little corner store or like grocery store, bodega or whatever. And they work really hard to put their kid so their kid can grow up and be a doctor, right?
Yeah.
Their kid becomes a COVID doctor. They can become a doctor in the pandemic and they play into all the COVID bullshit. And then like they end up being the reason why like immigrants can't fucking live the American dream anymore because they can't fucking have a sustainable small business.
Damn.
But it's a perfect fucking example.
It is.
Right? Because they go into the system, they play the same game, and then it ends up constricting more.
Yeah.
Because it is a conspiracy. It's like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. It's like, it's a conspiracy.
Yeah.
What do you want to say?
Yeah. It's really shitty because I think, okay, obviously that happens in the grand scheme of things where it's like, if only I could be on the winning side, then everything will be okay. Right. But everyone also does that within themselves as well. It's like,
think about this. What if they said, people say like, oh, well, if doctors got paid the same as janitors, nobody would be a janitor, right? Who would do all that work? Or if we just gave everybody money, people who would take out the trash, who would work at McDonald's? And it's like, well, what if everybody just became a doctor?
Yeah.
Then what? Like, if everyone was a doctor,
yeah,
what kind of society would that be? So like literally the argument is like a fucking, we have to have slaves.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
right?
also
But it's like, but I don't want my kid to be the slave. I just want other people's kids to be the slaves. That's how the current fucking elite think. It's how we all think. It's how the elite, meaning everybody in the fucking world who has time to sit and think about anything. That's how everyone thinks. And then even the poor people think that way because they're like, if we can just get my kids to be rich, it'll be fine. At least I got them. Because it's all about your genes, your survival. It's not about anything beyond that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just funny that like you mentioning all these immigrants that come and build a business, like they'll either like own a convenience store or own like a gas station or something. And then they push their kid to go through the education system to become then like have a proper career where it's like, you actually had more of the right idea when you were like in the business field, you know what I mean? And could have actually taught them that skill of like running a business. And maybe, they could have created an even better, like something that's not requiring your like 100% attention 7 days a week,
Right.
But it's like, you're actually in the environment to create the real American dream to actually have financial freedom and all that kind of stuff versus it's like going into the traditional education system to get a formal education to become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, which then now it's funny because like I remember going to school and being like, there are so many people here and we're all competing essentially for the same like 3 or 4 jobs. And It's like now that this has come to a point where it's like so overly saturated, like obviously the competition is going to be super high and there's only going to be a select few people that can actually make it, quote unquote, right? So it's like, how can everyone be having this like same ideology? And I remember having like so many arguments with my mother being like, I don't understand like why you're telling me to do this when like everyone else has the exact same idea. And it's really fucking hard because like it's the level of like, okay, now you have to compete with not just grades. It's like who you are, like being this well-rounded person and doing all these activities. And everyone that I know that went to med school, it was so stressed out and just like, it's like by the time you get there, it's like, I think they're like my age now which is 30 to actually be in their career. So it's like, you just spent 10 years of your freaking life to just get to this one spot. And
why can't it be like
on kids?
Why can't it be like stress-free and you're really like taking the time to learn stuff?
Yeah.
Right.
Why does it have to be like this massive, like I know my stepmom went to law school when I was younger. So I got to see that process, like when I was in high school and like the competition, the level of fucking like, and it's like, people always look up to the lawyer or the doctor, but it's like, it's just the most competitive person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're literally buying into this idea of like the people we aspire to or we hold in esteem are the most competitive people.
And then it's
then
like, what are we,
blame
chopped
the
liver?
fucking people in the and then we blame the people in government
Yeah.
Yeah.
for being
And-
competitive and always
and-
thinking about themselves. And it's like, so you have all those people, and then they have the tools of the system, which are the lawyers, the doctors. So it's like they're all resonating the same basic points. It was like, fuck everybody else. As long as I win, that's what's important, because you had to have that attitude to get through medical school. What if you were like, hey, it's not really a competition, guys. Let's all just take our time and learn. You would be the chopped liver.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
It's interesting too, because parents will unconsciously start their kids off that way of like, it's all about competition. And at the same time, consciously, like, I'm not putting my child to compete. It's not about competition. No, like,
Honey,
it's like,
as long as you try your best, then that's
right.
Like, the A doesn't matter. And it's like,
But unconsciously, what they're telling
to
their
the
kid
fucking
is,
employer, it does, or to
Yeah.
the college I'm trying to get to that you're saying is important, it does. So which is it? Like,
Exactly.
you're sending me a mixed message because my teacher only cares if I get a good grade.
Right.
So
Right.
and if you really don't care about that, why are you putting me in school?
Yeah.
Why don't you just teach me this stuff? Well, I didn't learn any of it. Didn't you go to school? Yeah. What? It makes zero fucking sense.
Right.
The only benefit of school is if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, so you can compete.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying if you want to be a good doctor or a lawyer.
Or do research.
Yeah.
Like, why can't you become a doctor by when you're 12 years old going and apprenticing for a doctor?
Yeah. Yeah.
So by the time you're 18, you know how to fucking be a doctor.
Right. Like, you,
Like, why are you
have,
worried about learning algebra?
yeah.
Learn algebra in about a couple of weeks if you just apply yourself. Like, why didn't you spend a whole fucking year doing that? So by the time you're 18, when most of your creative, I mean, by the time you're 30, like you're saying, you're you get to be a doctor, and it's like, you wasted a lot of time, man.
No
Yeah.
shit.
You could have
Yeah.
learned a lot more shit.
And a lot of your fertile years, all of that. It's like, Christina had sent me this article by Bernard, and it was talking about characters and illusion, and how like we live in this world where the point that I got out of it is, how people are always saying like, this world is an illusion, I'm living for the afterlife, or like, my higher being or whatever is somewhere else, and this is all an illusion or whatever. It's like, I can see that there is, if you practically look at it, there is some truth to that, because obviously we live in a physical reality. There are physical laws here. And if we want to make the best of our life currently, we have to work with these physical laws. It just makes sense, right? But there is some truth to the illusion, and the illusion is all these characters that we portray, that we identify with, that we go along with within ourselves and each other. And it's like, you're going along with a lie that is a lie, but it's the story that we've all like agreed to, and so it's okay. And so what that results in is all these characters that we've created to be, this is the elite, and so their survival, like what they're doing is out of survival, and so it's okay, because otherwise they would end up like all these other people who can't survive, that we're justifying what we're doing so that they can survive, but then that means everybody else can't survive. But it makes sense somehow, because we have enough food to feed everybody in the world, but it's not profitable. And so how would those people survive? So that's not fair, because that's why those people can't survive. It's like this thing that happens within us where we're so focused on survival. It's like, missing the forest for the trees, right? That's the game that we're playing with our characters and our identities and personalities, etc., in our own mind, where it's creating, like, that's the point within us where we're so hell-bent on looking out for our own survival that we're actually causing the point within us that causes us to need to fight for our survival. Does that make sense? It's like, because I'm looking at this point in the context of, if I want to create a world that's best for all, then I'm also focused on my own survival. Like, obviously yeah, I need to survive. Obviously, we all need to create enough for ourselves and our families, etc. But if that's all you're doing, like you were saying, that parent who is, you know, maybe they have a business, they come from an immigrant background, and then they put their kid to be a doctor who then shuts down all small businesses, so that it's like you just played right back into the same system. Everything that you did was for naught. It didn't matter actually.
Yeah.
Whereas if you actually are doing it with the purpose of, okay, here are the principles, like you're saying about the government, even it's all the same point. It's like, here are the principles. The principle is do what is best for all life, right? Considering all life and your thoughts, your deeds, everything, considering all life on earth, and actually creating a world that is best for everybody. And in order to do that, it's like, yes, you're going to have to survive. That would be best. That would be best, but not just survive, and not just your survival at the fucking detriment of everyone else, or cause everyone else to go into survival mode as well. That's fucked. That's so fucked.
There's a difference between taking care of your survival and being in survival mode.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
Because survival mode is you're only thinking about that and you justify everything based on that.
Yeah.
Instead of figuring out, how do I take care of my survival and then also at the same time do what is best for everybody else, knowing that I am going to die at some point. And so if I die right now, that's not best, but I am going to die. So if I'm like, no, I'm just going to focus only on staying alive, but you're eventually going to die. So what was the point?
Yeah.
Yes, stay alive. But if you go, and it's like thinking that it's like, it's the same. The problem is it bleeds into everything. So if you take the point of like educating your child, here's an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you just think about survival with educating your child, you'll just put them in school.
Yeah.
Does that ultimately long-term take care of their survival?
No.
Guaranteed, no.
No. But now if you decide, okay, I'm going to not put them in school, I'm going to educate them at home with Technotutor. Or even if you just said, I'm just going to homeschool them, you're going to have, it's going to be harder.
Yeah, for sure.
It?
Yeah.
It's not going to be easier. It's going to be harder. I always look at it as it's harder physically, but it's not harder emotionally. To me, I would rather do the physically hard thing. And physical doesn't necessarily mean you're using your physical body. It could just mean mental effort, if that makes sense.
I see what you're saying.
Reading a book to a kid versus sending them to school. One takes more physical effort, even though it's not physically demanding.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? But it takes more of your physical actual time to read to the kid than put them in school, right?
Yeah.
But emotionally, which is harder?
Putting your kids in school. Because the result of it is going to be like, you don't know your child. Someone else is like raising your child, essentially. You're not there with your child. And you don't know if they actually learn anything either. And they're just going to go right into the system. They're the child of the system, essentially. They're not your child anymore.
It's like, how do I explain it? It's like you have a kid. It's like, think of it. If you have a kid and then you just put them in school and you put them in Disney and all that stuff, you're literally just being the surrogate parent for the system to have another slave. They're like, oh, look, another slave came into the world. Here, will you just take care of their survival for us? But the way we approach it is like, okay, we're going to take care of our kids' survival. But beyond that, let's educate them effectively. So we're not just having them and being like, oh, look, I have a kid. It's like when you see people have a dog and they're just like, it's like an accessory.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They just have it in their purse or whatever. And it's like, and then they just yell at it and they don't care about it and whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's like an accessory. It's like when you went and bought the bike that you never ride. Hey, I have a bike like that. That's cool. But like, you're not really taking that thing. And it's like going and buying a potted plant from the store that you didn't develop or raise, and then just putting it there and then just like watching it wither. You know,
about my
versus
plant habits?
versus like planting an entire garden yourself and harvesting it and then replanting and weeding and doing all the stuff that you need to do to like raise that garden. It's like a totally different. On the one hand, if you'd never plant a garden, it's like it's really cool actually, because Katie, we have flowers all the time in the house now. And the kids will randomly go pick them and put them in vases. Those are just from our property. We never have to go buy flowers ever at the store.
Yeah.
She's got dahlias. She's got all kinds of flowers I don't even know about, like really hard to grow flowers, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just kind of cool because like before, it's like if we wanted flowers, we'd have to just go to the store and get some flowers. So then it's like, imagine the Valentine's symbolism. The man is just a slave to the system that's like, we want to sell some extra flowers this month and some extra chocolates.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like, if I brought Katie flowers from the store and chocolates from the store, why would that impress her? She'd probably see like, well, I have better flowers in my garden right there. And two, we can make that chocolate ourselves and make it way better.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I'm just giving an example. Right. Or like, why would I go buy her a cake for her birthday? She'd be like, I can make a better cake than that. You know? And in fact, I came home the other day and Max was so excited. He's like, Cameron, I wish I could remember exactly what he said, but he was like, you know, you got to come into the house. And I'm just like getting out of the car. Right. And he's like, you got to come inside. He's like, I made something. And I was like, what did you make? He's like, you have to come inside and show you. And I'll show you. So I come inside, he opens the door and he goes, popovers. And he's like super excited. Right. And it's like these like popovers, like some kind of like doughy bread kind of thing. Right.
Yeah.
And he literally had made them himself. Like he did the dough, he did all this stuff, right? You know?
Yeah.
And it was just really cool seeing that. And like the other day we made something, I forget what it was, but Seneca had been the one that made like the dough for it. I forget what it was. I think it was the hamburger buns we made or something. And she had made the dough with Katie and everything. So it's just really cool. Yeah. And so it's like going in, you can just go get a hamburger, but it's very different when it's like you did all of that yourself, you know. And obviously there's some degree you can't, it's hard to get the meat yourself because you have to have the cows and process it. So we get it from a local farmer that we know. And there's, you know, there's obviously going to be some level of compromise, but wouldn't it be cool if everybody had access to being able to get everything at that level?
Yeah.
You know, why can't you have a community that is self-sustaining to the degree that you don't need to go out to some big, gigantic automated thing that's totally removed from you? Because there's benefits to having something that's, you know, like for example, like why would you have honey that was done locally?
Yeah, definitely. Because then it's using the pollen that was in the air around you. So you're going to have an immunity or an immune boost, let's say, to whatever pollen or allergens are in that air.
And no one considers that, right?
Yeah.
So it makes just a perfect, just one example of the same thing with like breastfeeding the baby. And part of the problem with the breastfeeding point, because I know women get very like, they'll get very
defensive.
I don't want to say defensive. Yeah, it's not the right word though, because I understand where they're coming from. Like they'll feel like you're shaming them if you tell them that they're bad for using formula. And it's not about shaming them. It's just realizing the degree to which propaganda has been done around C-sections, around fear about giving birth, around breastfeeding and all that, or you know, formula feeding and all this stuff, to where it's like a lot of times Katie will be supporting somebody and they'll be like, yeah, I'm having a really hard time with the breastfeeding thing. And they're like, she'll talk to them. And it's like, because they've been giving him a bottle for the first 6 months. And now they're trying to do the breastfeeding and it's really hard and it's not working. It's like, because now this baby is raised on formula and maybe they were pumping, but they're raised on the bottle. So they didn't have that natural learning ability phase in the beginning of, so now you're dealing with basically an infant level's ability, a newborn's ability to latch, but at 6 months where they can kick and do all this other stuff. So it's even harder. It's kind of like you're trying to homeschool your kid when they're 12, but they've already been in school for the first, 5-7 years.
Yeah.
Right. So now they have all those patterns that you're having to deal with. Right. And and you haven't developed that relationship with them and that bond and so forth of education.
Yeah. That's tough.
And the daycare point. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why it's definitely best to start from the beginning. You know, it's definitely best to start from the beginning. Like you're saying, like you buy a plant from Lowe's, let's say, and it comes in a pot. It's like, all right. I mean, you may be able to plant it in your garden and, it grows, but to plant from a seed or a seedling, from the very beginning, it's a completely different experience. To go from, especially with kids,
I mean, even
like,
getting it from Lowe's and putting it in your own garden is cool.
yeah,
But then like go to the next level of like, oh, you just went to the grocery store and got the flowers that are already cut. And so
yeah,
then you look at, for that to be available on demand, what level of system has to be created to provide that constantly?
yeah,
So all I'm pointing out is the more that you take more responsibility, those systems are not as necessary. You can have system, because so much of our system is just like, well, like think about it. People want flowers on demand. So we have to create a system that gives them the flowers on demand. But if people start questioning that, and we've built this entire structure, and that's what our survival is based on, well, then we're fucked. So now we have to propagandize everybody that homegrown flowers are poisonous or something. You know what I mean? So they won't even
right,
think about it. And it's like, then you start getting these levels where it's like all this manipulation just to keep the system going. So it's not like I'm saying you need to be totally independent from the system right away. It's just, we're just looking at the levels to which we buy into stuff, and then we allow everything to be automated. And so then when you look at your children, it's like the one thing I would think you should care about the most, but we're allowing it to be done to them. And so then we complain that Disney's doing the Black Mermaid and they're, doing trans stuff and all this and critical race theory and all that. And it's like, but you said you wanted the flowers on demand.
right,
You know what I mean? Like you want to be able to walk into the store and get a thought. You want to be able to just come home and your child is educated.
right, yeah,
I mean, then they have to create a system that makes people totally dependent on that system, because it's like the phone lines. You know how much it costs them to upgrade the systems?
yeah, it's a lot.
They have to put that in. It doesn't just exist all of a sudden. So they are taking a risk. So then they have to tell everybody, well, you need to have 5G. You can't have 4G. You got to have 5G. And no, it's not dangerous. And they won't even do the testing, because
Right.
if they do, I mean,
You know what I just realized? Okay. We've been operating in this world. You know what obviously but but a perpetual motion machine, right? Perpetual energy, right? What do we know about perpetual energy?
it's the source of all life in the world. And I haven't seen one. Doesn't make sense in principle.
Right. It doesn't exist in our physical reality, right? But we've been operating as if we just have perpetual energy. And the reality is we've had this big store of energy, and it was mostly it's based on how many people are coming into the planet, being used as slaves, being discarded right away, right? And just filtering through that, or cycling through that rather, over and over and over and over again. And at some point, there's going to be a tapering off of that. There's going to be right now, like we were saying earlier, there's a big push for, hey, stop having kids, have less kids and all this. And so we've seen that dwindle down, which means the system
But
itself.
it's not a lack of energy. It's the money system that has been created, which is based on self-interest only, can't work in principle. It's like what we're collectively experiencing right now is revenge of the ego.
Can you explain that?
Well, it's like
because what I see is that it's not sustainable. It never has been sustainable. It was just we had enough,
right?
Enough
that's
at the
what
time
revenge
to
of the
keep
ego
it
is
going.
about.
Mm-hmm.
It's like energy based, meaning it's like it's based on something that has a beginning and an end.
Mm-hmm.
So you're constantly trying to find new ways to reinvent it. It's like you get into a marriage based on a feeling of love. Well, it's going to have an end. So at the end of that, if that's what you've done, you either are going to have to try to recreate that and then go through another cycle of it where it's going to end, or you're going to have to find a new way to operate, a new principle. Like with Katie and I, we went through the cycle of the love feeling and then all that kind of stuff. And then that point, it's like the honeymoon phase, right?
Yeah.
But then at a certain point in our relationship, we had to look at, why are we actually together? What's the purpose of it? Let's make it about the principle of doing what's best and learning and figuring out how to do all that and pushing ourselves and holding each other accountable. And that'll be more supportive than if we just base it on some feelings and energy, because that always ends up in just anger, hate, blame, all this other stuff. And so when we base it on real principles, it doesn't mean that there isn't going to be pain sometimes. It's just that's actually sustainable. Because we're not going to each other to look for love. Doesn't mean you can't go to your partner to look for, or to ask and get support with, like, releasing some stress that you've built up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It doesn't mean like you can't ever come to them and share like what you've built up or anything like that. It's just, you're not doing it like, you're not constantly mining them for energy because you're not taking responsibility.
Yeah, like fulfilling something that's lacking within you.
Yeah.
Right. It's like
more like a support, comfort effect. You know what I mean? Like just things that something
Yeah,
that
it's
you would
like,
actually give to
hey-
your children. Do you know what I mean? Like it's the same type of
and see
love,
and that's, it's a good point with the children too, is like, we don't do the birthdays, and it's not that we don't ever have a birthday party. We talked about this. I don't need to go into all the details, but meaning we don't do the typical way people do it, the Christmas, Easter, all those different things, movies, all that stuff. We don't play into that at that level because it just builds up a very big high, and it's like, it's exploitative.
That's even like having your kids watch Disney movies because you watched Disney movies is like, it's the same thing. You wanting them to like have that same joy or excitement or feeling or whatever, but based on like, you want that, you want to see like, yeah, look what I did for you. And yeah,
You also
you
want to
enjoy this.
justify it having been done to you.
Right. Which is like,
and you turned out fine.
and he turned out
Yeah,
fine.
and I turned out fine. When someone says that, I'm like, have you ever heard of the Great Reset? You're not turning out fine.
Yeah.
It's like, how was the last 3 years of your life?
Fine.
You turned out fine.
It
Oh, no,
was
that's
fine.
not my fault. That's the system. And so they go into blame, right?
Right.
Something else. It's like, no, that's you. That's the Simpsons. The system.
Simpsons.
Symptoms. The system that turned you out fine is the same system that's doing everything it's doing right now.
Yeah.
You can't act like your parents raised you based on Disney of like, no, I actually investigated this. It's actually best for you. It's important that you do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The stuff that you would do that way, wouldn't you be like, okay, it's important for them to learn math. It's important for them to learn how to read. It's important for them to think critically. It's important for them to know how to like test things and experiment and be creative. And like, that's the things you would think, well, if I'm going to do a Disney movie, it's going to be a very rare thing at the most, because it's kind of a waste of their time.
Right.
But it's like, oh no, but I'm putting them in school. So they're getting all that other stuff, right?
And you need to know the things you learn in school because I remember those things.
Wait, no, I don't remember those things. That's why you need.
But again, if they could just go through that system and benefit from it, then I could continue accepting it the way it is, even though it didn't work for me.
Oh, hey,
Right.
Did you see? I sent you the that comedian Tyler Fisher.
I haven't watched that yet.
Okay, so he did an interview, and I just watched the first 10 minutes of it because the first 10 minutes were pretty good, and I got the what I wanted out of it. I got the thumbnail from the first 10 minutes. I like it when they do that, you know. But essentially, he's a comedian, whatever. He's been fighting to be recognized like on a more national stage for a while. This isn't just a recent thing, but he was told pretty much every step of the way that, hey, listen, we like you. It's just right now we're not doing white guys. We can't do white guys right now, right? And he was like, oh, okay. And he's like, basically, this is pretty much normal today. This is so normal. No one says anything about it. It's just like, all right, well, got to try harder. You got to find some other avenue, you know, just do something different. And he said it got to the point where he had a therapist because he was like, all these people, you know, it seems like I can't win. Like I'm working really hard. People tell me they like me. These agents are telling me, you know, you're doing great, but we can't get you a job because they're not hiring white guys and all this. Right. And he said, I guess met with some manager, hired a manager or whatever. and they said, hey, we want you to audition for this part. We've got a really good shot, all this, they love you, all this. And then they said, a couple months later, they called him and said, hey, and he was excited because he's like, oh, I did that audition. It's a couple months later. They're calling me back. I know what this is. Great. Like, because if I didn't get it, why would they call me back? They said,
Imagine
hey,
calling you 3 months later. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. they call him back and they say, hey, loved you. You were really great. You're like great fit for this role. It's just, we can't hire you because you're white. And he said, is that like a company-wide policy? And they said, actually, yeah, it is. And he's like, oh, fuck. And the interesting thing about it, the reason why he was doing this interview is because he recorded it. He recorded it because he said, like, going to his therapist and all this, the therapist, I guess, was also helping him with his relationship. And he said, record some things so that, just see if you're crazy or not. and that way you can defend yourself.
Like, don't sit here and tell me that all these things are happening. But
exactly. And so he happened to record this conversation that he was having with this manager, where the manager is saying, this is company-wide policy that we're not accepting white guys. Right. And the obvious point is, like, if they were to say that about Black guys or Hispanics or whatever, it would be like, everyone would be disgusted, like, just absolutely like, what the fuck? You can't do that. But because there's been all this propaganda, again, making people feel inadequate, all that, where it's like the white people are the evil ones and all this, then it's almost acceptable. And we're doing, it's the same cycle. It's, what you're saying, like, there's a reset. There was a reset there. We had it where it was, hey, you shouldn't discriminate against people based on their race and all this or whatever. And that energy kind of died. And now we have to start it all over again, but now with white people. And now it's okay again. It's a serious revenge of the ego that we're going through as a society.
Isn't the argument that, like, well, the white people did it in the first place, so now they know what it feels like, right?
Right.
It's almost like a karmic argument.
Right. Yeah.
But then what did Black people do a long time ago to deserve slavery?
The Moors. They don't forget, man.
Never forget the Moors.
Never forget the Moors. They pretty much, here's something I heard, that the Moors, like the Dark Ages was actually when the Moors ruled over Europe, and so they called it the Dark Ages because they didn't like that they were dark skinned. something to that effect.
That's the Dark Ages.
That's the Dark Ages.
It makes sense. All the monks like ran into like their monasteries and like closed the doors. They were like, "Oh, did you hear that rap music playing down the street? We got to close up the windows.
It's dark out there
to ourselves." Yeah, it's dark because they closed the windows. They're like, dude, if you just opened the window, it would have been like the enlightenment.
No, they'll see that we're white in here.
They're gonna copy my homework. I got to get credit for this,
Yeah,
I'm translating the Bible into something no one will ever understand.
That's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're trying to make it easier to understand. It's like, and thou thus did this saith, and you're like, just put it in Latin, dude. I could have just used Google Translate. Like, come on.
Yeah. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty fucked. I don't know. What else can we say? I mean, I guess we didn't really, we were going to talk about Revenge of the Ego more specifically. Maybe we can just touch on that before we end today.
Yeah.
But like, it's a point that comes up that we see it in a lot of different areas. And it's like, here's the basic pattern. Like, anybody I would highly suggest to go after you're done watching this, like, go listen to Revenge of the Ego by Bernard Pullman. Even if you have listened to it, even if you listened to it yesterday, listen to it after what I'm going to give as my context to it, and just see if that makes sense, if it puts it in a new light. Because it's funny, what I'm about to explain, I've talked to people about it, and they were like, listen to Revenge of the Ego tons of times, and they're like, oh yeah, okay. I'm like, that's the point of it. And they weren't like questioning me like, I don't know, man, you're wrong. They were just like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense now. And I'm like, that's what he literally is saying, right? So it's like, when you form a relationship between 2 points, and the reason why the word point is used is because it can be a lot of different things. It can be a business relationship. It can be a romantic, you know what I mean? Like partner relationship. It can be your relationship to, you know, exercising. It could be like any particular points that you're forming a relationship with another point. Okay. Relationship just means you're now putting focus onto it and you're defining yourself in relationship to that thing in a certain way. And typically what we do is we define it based on the vocabulary we already have. Like we were talking about the word sabotage today, this morning, and Max was asking about sabotage, and Katie was like, well, you know, like it was something where she was like, she was explaining something, and I was like, no, Max, I think maybe he's not understanding what the word sabotage means. Because it was kind of like, it's like if you said, like, if I said somebody sabotage something, you'd be like, what do you mean sabotage? And I'd be like, well, you know, they were sabotaging this and this and this. Versus what you really meant was like, no, what does the word sabotage mean?
Right. I got you.
So then we had to explain to him sabotage. But imagine if no one ever did that.
Yeah.
So you just kind of make an assumption about what you think it means based on the sort of kind of way the context, which includes like the emotion of it.
Yeah.
Like, so maybe it's something bad.
Yeah.
But, you know, maybe it means something, like you're kind of trying to guess, basically.
It's a vague understanding.
Yeah, it's like, so you might be right, you might be wrong. And it depends on what that person actually meant. Maybe they were using it in the wrong way. Like we were looking up the word tool.
Yeah.
Because one of the comments the person said was like, it's the most not obviously literally it's an exaggeration, but they were saying it's the most misused word. Because people say like, oh, that guy's a tool, but really it meant like you're being used for someone else's purposes. So it's like, how does that fit in? Because none of us, that's not what we were thinking it meant. You know what I mean? We were thinking it meant the guy's just an arrogant asshole who's trying too hard, like, which is not at all that.
I thought it was a euphemism for dick.
Well, it is also, right?
Yeah.
It's also like the word asshole. Like when someone says that person's an asshole, what does that normally mean?
The tool is supposed to go in the asshole.
You are literally my butthole.
But it means like you're a jerk, right? You don't care about their feelings or whatever. But to me, it doesn't make sense when somebody says, "Oh, well, I feel like the asshole here." Do you ever see that? Like when someone does something and then like, well,
He's a tool.
I don't mean to be the asshole, but it's like, how does that definition of the word fit into that context?
Yeah.
You're self-proclaiming.
You know, like, oh, you're making me look like an asshole. And usually people mean that when it's like you're maybe the one that's stupid or something, or like you did something foolish. And it's like, now I feel like I'm the asshole, you know? And it's like, so it's like people use these words in different contexts.
Right.
And so imagine you're learning everything in your life, and especially in the age where you're just absorbing stuff automatically. So it becomes imprinted as this is the definition, even if it was vague. So then later in life, it's like difficult for you to see it in a different context. It's difficult for you to accept a different context for it because you're not really absorbing in the same way you were before. Somebody can explain to you. It's like you can study the word in school. And they're like, no, this is what it means. You're like, okay, that's what it means. That's what it means. That's what it means. But it still means to you what it meant the first time, basically, right? So you're developing relationships to points in your life within yourself, outwardly, based on certain words, based on certain definitions. So the word exercise, you know, like maybe when you heard that word, it's just like you took it as something that you do when you're overweight only.
Oh,
because that was the context. Do you see what I mean? Like
I thought you meant like when you have a demon inside you and the priest comes over and exercises you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That is what I meant.
Okay. All right. So I had the right definition.
You just don't understand the meaning of the word. Like it means you need to like get that demon on a regimen of, you know, some running in the mornings, maybe some soul cycling, you know,
soul cycling.
Get him one of those Pelotons or whatever they're called.
That's genius.
Isn't that called a soul cycle? Isn't that one of them?
Yeah.
Soul cycling.
Well,
yeah.
I think that's the brand. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love it.
But anyways, like, so you're forming relationships to stuff. Like, so for example, you just like, I'm gonna start exercising. Why? Because you're overweight. Okay. But then why are you overweight? Right. And what's the real cause? And it may be very difficult to figure out, but the point is there's some kind of cause, right? Maybe it's because you're not exercising, but your feeling about your weight, like really negatively, is low self-esteem. You haven't really dealt with the point of it's just a physical problem that I have, a challenge, and here's the reasons why it's a problem for me, and this is why I need to solve it. It's more like I feel bad, I don't fit into the dress, and therefore I don't get the attention I'm looking for. I don't have the self-image. So it's all this other stuff as to why you're now going to exercise. So you're actually trying to use this positive. So you feel negatively, and you're like, so you get excited about exercising, and you're like, look at me, I'm running and I'm doing all this stuff, and you're already trying to feel as if you're in that image that you want on day one.
Yeah.
But I've been very overweight, and it's like, it's not going to change on day one. It's not going to change on day 10. It's not going to, it's just, if you're just exercising, you're not even changing what you eat, or any other points, it's going to take a long time to potentially see a result, if at all, And so if you've built it up on this positive energy you're putting into it of like, oh, I'm going to be so fit, and I'm going to put it, and then that one day it's been 3 months, and you put on that dress or that suit, and you're like, or you go into like a changing room, and like it's not a flattering mirror, or it's like it kind of has the opposite effect, and you just feel suddenly really bad, right? So you've built up this positive, now you go really negative. So that's just a basic thing I think anyone can relate to, at least in theory, if you haven't experienced it.
Right.
Now imagine a relationship. You get into a relationship, you're lovey-dovey, you're having all this fun and so forth, right? And you just feel these feelings, these really positive. I mean, I think everyone can relate to that love feeling. It's just like this extreme high feeling. But then eventually something happens. They don't give you that sign that you're looking for. You don't realize it's just the energy running out. And now you're actually looking for the signs as to justify why it's them and not you, and why it's not just an energy cycle running out.
Whoa. Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
And your ego the whole time is like, aha, I was just waiting for this point. And then it's going to start feeding back to you all the thoughts. See, I told you you knew you couldn't trust this person. Like when your mom said you're always going to be overweight, or you're just a little fat pig, and that's why you're fat, and like, or like you can't trust men because look at what your father did, and all these points or whatever it is. And it's like, then it's like, now imagine placing yourself as the victim, and then you're turning the other person into an evil point. They're bad. And then the initial point that you got into the relationship on, it's like the total opposite now. I hate this person, and I've always hated them, and they're just terrible and all this stuff. And it's like, but you were having an amazing time before. What happened to all that? What's going on here? And it's like, is it not simply because the relationship wasn't built on total clarity of principle in the first place? And this is why I always tell people, like, especially if they have kids, and especially if they have kids, it's like, if they're like thinking about getting divorced, and I'm like, first of all, why is that a solution?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I just don't feel like I'm in love with this person anymore. Or like, we don't get along, or we just don't see eye to eye, or they're not the same person anymore. Or like, I'm going in a different direction, or I want to do something and I want to whatever. And it's like, okay, can you change? Can the other person change? And a lot of times people are like, well, I just don't see how they can. And that's a different story. But it's like, if they can, then why not just wipe the slate clean? That's what self-forgiveness is about, and start all over. And now you're in the consequence. It's not going to suddenly make everything good. It's not going to, it's like if you bulldoze your house because you realized it was falling apart, you don't suddenly have a house again.
Yeah.
You have to now rebuild it.
Yeah.
And maybe there's certain parts you'll need to take out certain parts and rebuild those parts. I'm not saying you have to literally wipe everything clean, but you don't know. So you have to kind of examine everything, tap on every wall, check everything, right?
Right.
Look at, and then you'll know because, oh, well, I always hear this door creaking. Okay, go over there first and check. Why is that door? What's going on? Figure out where it's coming from. You know what I mean? So you start with what's going on inside of you. What are the thoughts? What is the blame? What is the anger? Where is the feelings coming in? And forgive those points. And then you can look at the relationship again. But if you're like, nope, I just got to go somewhere else. What is that implying about your new starting point?
You're going to take yourself with you.
You're just going to do it again.
Yeah.
Because you're just going, no, it's the other person. They're to blame. I have no responsibility in it. And if I can just find somebody who really appreciates me, right? If they really see my worth, and they're not a narcissist and like all this other stuff. You know what I mean? Like they really, but the thing is, okay, you're gonna have, guess what though? You haven't changed your starting point fundamentally. So what are you gonna build that relationship based on?
Same thing. Feeding
Right.
feelings and emotions. That's what I was
Oh,
thinking too. Like,
And now you've deceived yourself even more. So how much harder is it going to be when that one crashes?
oh, fucking
much more
devastating.
devastating.
It's kind of like that
But
point
just yeah,
in the Matrix. Remember when Agent Smith is telling Neo, like, we tried to create or maybe he's telling Morpheus, we tried to create a world where everything was taken care of for you, but humans couldn't handle it, right? And it's like, it's that point of like, you're going to take yourself with you wherever you go. And so if you have not changed, how can you expect the environment to change? How can you expect to be placed in a perfect environment and not fuck it up?
and let's say you got into a relationship, like, because we have a lot of people in self-perfected, right? And we're
Yeah.
always all walking this process. So let's say you got into a relationship with someone through self-perfected, destiny, technoty, or whatever, and you said, I'm basing it on principle, and then it ends up to the point where it seems to not work out anymore, right?
Mhm.
This is really important to be like, okay, where were the points where I, and obviously them as well, but I can't really control them. Where was the points where I was participating in energy, in fear of loss, in whatever points, right? And if everyone can come to a point of stability within themselves, a point of self-forgiveness, then you just pick back up. That doesn't mean some things don't change, but it's really like a participation that changes. It's like with Katie and I, we restarted our relationship. And I think a lot of people look at our relationship and they look at our kids and they're like, wow. And I get messages from people like, you have everything I wanted. And like, I've been following you for like 10 years and I've seen how much. And it's like, I wish I could have been more effective at getting through to that person to just do what I was doing. But the thing is, like, it was a result of me going all the way within, let me just fuck my old life. Like I still have my body. I still have my family, my parents, all this, nothing's physically changed, but it's like all the attachments that I had to what I thought was important. That's what I mean by fuck my life. Like, fuck all that. Like, my parents said to me I had to get a good job and go to college and all this stuff. I'm like, why is that important? Like, what's going on? Like, I had to question those things, right?
Yeah.
What's important to me in a relationship? Why am I with this particular person? What am I actually looking for? What's ultimately going to make me happy? Because the relationship I was in, it was all based on self-image. It was all based on how I felt in relation to defining myself as needing some particular image to be fulfilled. But that image can never be fulfilled. It's not real.
Right.
So also, obviously, realizing my self-responsibility within standing up in this world, it's not an easy task. It's very hard for all of us. But if we, as a group, don't support each other and say, look, here's the principles. Here's what we're here to do based on those principles. You can't just be like, well, I've got the principles and I have my own way of doing it. And, you don't need to change the system.
Yeah.
It's like, how could you come to that conclusion? It's not about, and here's the thing, there is no one person or two people or anything that's the authority that what they say goes.
Yeah.
Is that the world we want to create? And what most people do, when you'll see, like, a perfect example is like in a relationship where the woman's like, oh, that he was a total narcissist.
Right.
It's like, yeah, you're the narcissist. Only a narcissist would say someone's a narcissist. You see what I'm trying to say? Like, meaning it's like, that's why it's just that word. It's like a buzzword. It's like, oh, they're a narcissist. And it's like, but you're still single after 30 years. If you're such an amazing fucking person, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, if you're really good at soccer, you're going to have lots of offers. You can't be like, oh, they just don't like me. No one wants me. It's like,
right.
They don't care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that there's never been a situation where a person was in a relationship with a narcissist and that person was destructive. I'm just saying, typically when I see that, it's always coming from a person who stands for nothing. And it's just a way of blaming. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that well, it's just interesting because now, especially with a lot of like personal development and self-help stuff, especially in terms of like finding love and relationships, it's like people are aware of, okay, like I keep attracting this particular type of guy or woman, right? So it's like they're recognizing the pattern that is playing out in their life and that they're time looping. But the really big distinction with, for example, like Katie and you recognize because of the process that you guys were taking was the new education of like, oh, how can we actually like base our relationship and start a relationship where it's solid in our foundation so that we're not going to be like playing out those same patterns of self-sabotage, but actually creating something that's real, right? Whereas like people will come to that awareness but never actually change their starting point in the education because they don't actually know any better. It's the same thing as to why you would have kids and say, I want better, but then you don't actually have the knowledge of be like, okay, well, but what is better or best for them? It's like, you're just going to do this exact same thing over and over and over again. So that's why it's crucial for what we need to share in terms of like, okay, but how do you actually start a relationship that's not based on feelings and emotions? Because Drake and I, like, that's what we've done. And we've never had that like super high, low, like we've never had to like restart our relationship because of that. It's like we right from the get-go, it's been like that. And it's just been this like constant, like solid foundation of growth and also like accelerating, helping us to accelerate to get to where we want to go quicker. Do you know what I mean? So
it's like, what if you start off not in love and then create an actual real love,
right,
versus starting off in love and then losing it?
Yeah.
Because if it comes from you actually creating it, you don't go into a fear of loss about it.
Yeah.
Because you're like, we created this together. And even if something happens that makes us question that or tests us, we can just go back to where we started. That's okay.
Right. Yeah.
Because it was the principles that got you there, not, yeah.
That's the beauty of it, is like you can go back to, okay, wait, why are we doing this? Like, like, okay, what happened? All right, start from the beginning. And then you can go, okay, so where are we not upholding that, or whatever the case may be? And you can easily come back together in principle. And I'm saying easily, but I mean, like, it's really obvious to see. It's not complicated or difficult to see where you come back together and at what point either of you were not holding the principles, right? And then once you're clear on that, then it's like, all right, well, now we know what we need to do. And like you said, you may be in the consequence of it, right? But now you're clear on where you're going. And it's not the same as you start off in love and then like everything fucking crashes. And then it's like, where do we even pick up the pieces? Because there is no foundation. There is no like starting point of principles or anything. It's just like, I don't even know if it's worth it.
Imagine you're trying to look and search for how can we get that love back? And you're like,
right.
It's like if you licked all the chocolate off of the wafer and then you're going, where do I get the chocolate again? And you're like, you don't. It was the starting point of needing the chocolate, and that's your total focus. That's the way it got you into the situation.
Yeah.
Let go of that point.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And so when people get divorced, apparently most divorces are initiated by women. You can see that pattern where it's like they get to this certain point in their life and they're like, oh, I'm not having this fun and this excitement that I wanted, because, you know, their husband's also participating in the point. And we're in a system that sucks the energy out of you. It's like using you so that you generate energy so it can be sent to a machine to run a machine. Yeah. And you're thinking it's for you. And there's a copy of that machine. It's called your ego. It's inside of you. And it's not going to you. It's your ego. And you've identified with that as who you are, that when it takes over, you don't even stop to question, like, wait, why am I acting like this? Why am I thinking like this?
That's the point that I was making with the government and the people, right? The mind and the body, or the ego rather, and the body. Yeah,
exactly. Right. And see that, but that's the perfect point as to why that is just a reflection of what each of us is doing. We do it in all of our relationships. So the government is just a more complex set of points that we can't really see directly how we are participating in it. But it's more like, if you're doing this in all your other relationships, You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like if you're
why
at a
wouldn't it be the
party,
case?
it's like if you went to a party and everyone's wearing flip-flops, you can't get mad if, it's like the dress code is flip-flops. It's like no one's forcing anyone to do it. It's just what everyone's doing. And so it's a informal atmosphere. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you can't be mad at like, why isn't this a more formal atmosphere? And it's like, but everyone is participating in creating that atmosphere by what they're choosing to wear, for example. You see what I mean? So if you want to change that, you have to support everyone to be like, change clothes. Then we're going to have, it's suddenly the same people, total different atmosphere.
For sure.
Right.
100%.
And so the point with the government is like, if everybody were to support themselves to change, now, unfortunately, to think that we can get every adult on the planet to suddenly change, and then that would work if it were possible, but it's very difficult for adults to change. It's completely like that, to that level required. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying to get the whole masses of humanity to do it, when there's so many systems in place that reinforce not doing it and just getting mad about little mermaid's race, instead it's like, how do you at least support, as like a major point? In addition to that, how do you support parents to support their kids to be a lot smarter so that they can see through a lot of that, so they're not as susceptible? And then obviously those who can stand up and put themselves into the positions that are necessary in this world. It's not just about being in the government. It's about being a leader in all areas where people see you and they hear you talking about principles. Like if Rihanna and, Beyonce and fucking Taylor Swift were talking about principles and living from that all the time, it would have a much greater effect, wouldn't it? I'm only saying them because they already have a large influence.
Yeah.
Of course, they wouldn't be in that position if they had done that from the beginning, would they?
Yeah.
Which just shows, like, if they suddenly did that, the next day you'd hear all these newspaper articles saying how they went crazy, blah, 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 they're getting help, and they'd come out with an apology, or you'd never hear about them anymore. They went crazy, whatever.
It's like,
right?
that video that you had on your Facebook, Cat Williams talking about Will Smith and Chris Rock. That was actually really like insightful of how it's like, these are businesses working with, stars, and you think it's like this spontaneous thing that's just happened or whatever, but there's so many different entities represented by Will Smith and Chris Rock. There's like 300 corporations, he is saying. And so for that to happen and unfold the way that it does, where this is a mainstream actor gets paid $20 million for.
I mean, these are like the number one actors that are black, right?
Yeah. And it's like
comedians and so forth, right?
And you think that's like spontaneous. Like, don't you think if, something were happening that was not scheduled or called for, they would cut to commercial, you wouldn't even hear about it, there'd be police called or whatever, like all that.
They would be like zooming in on Will Smith and seeing his reaction, and then, you know what I mean? Like, it was like scripted, cinematic.
Exactly.
They're all actors anyways.
Exactly.
It's like that's
I like that point
job.
he made. He's like, you see these people who get paid to create illusions, and then you're surprised that they could possibly be doing that in this context.
Right.
It's like they're paid, they're very good at creating things to look real that aren't real. Like,
yeah. It's like they get paid to make up stories and play make-believe, and you're surprised when it's exposed that they made up a story and played make-believe. Like, what?
See, and that's interesting too. Part of the whole Oscars, Academy Awards thing, all that stuff, is it perpetuates the illusion that it's like you're seeing a side of them that's real.
Right.
Like, they're not acting right now. Like, they're real right now. This is just them being themselves. And then imagine you're such a good actor that you think about it. You know when the camera's on, right?
Yeah.
You know how you see interviews with these actors and they always seem like really awkward and stuff.
Right.
Do you ever think maybe they're just acting there too? And they're just deliberately creating a persona of themselves. So it's like, oh, look, it's the real person.
Yeah. That's possible.
You see what I'm saying? It's this is, but I mean, they can't act. They can't be like, the camera's on, let me act now. Like, oh, they're in an interview and suddenly it's like, well, yeah, sometimes and it's like, why wouldn't they just act?
Right.
Or when they just go into a character, like they are so good at creating that illusion. So it's just fascinating. I don't know why we brought that point up, but
I was bringing it up because it's like, well, actually, I don't know.
It was still an interesting point regardless.
Yeah. Oh, because you were
Um,
saying Rihanna, and like if they were to suddenly turn and do something that was not in line with what these corporations are, with what the system wants, they would be immediately called crazy. They'd like you
right,
hear
as
about
if
it.
they can just do whatever they want
Right.
right
Exactly.
now, like, which is like where everything they're saying, like, you think Taylor Swift has a political opinion on her own, or is it just, this is what I'm supposed to say? It
No.
may be that she doesn't agree and she's like, I have to say these things, or she doesn't care and she's just told to say them. You don't know at what level she's doing it from herself
Right.
or not, or whatever. That's why when people say like, oh, these leftist comedian or leftist actors, and you're like, they're probably, I mean, they're not leftists. They're clearly not about social progress because they are super elitist. They're super wealthy. They live in elitist communities. Like they're not actually like that mentality. They're
Right.
just spokespeople for this particular
Right.
political power base. That's all it is. Like, why get mad at them of like their politics? It's like they're acting.
Right. Right.
You should be upset at the fact that there's a political system that values, or that it's not even the political system, it's an education system where children's, their education is like we were talking about earlier. So revenge of the ego, let's go back to the beginning. Why do you form these relationships based on these definitions? It's because no one took responsibility for properly educating you on the meaning of every word. So when like they get to the point of being in a relationship and they get those feelings of love, they've already been prepared, or they don't base relationships on that kind of thing in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Or they don't develop those ineffective patterns that they're then reacting to and developing relationships based on. It comes down to the individual education of the child. And a system as a just send your kid off to a big group where the teacher has no idea what they're doing actually, and they're just a normal, like, go and if you could go be a fly in the wall of the house of your child's teacher, do you think there's some fucking special amazing person that's just so amazing, or are they just watching Game of Thrones just like you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just in doing all the same bullshit. Like they're not, we have this idea of like, because they're teachers, they're special.
Yeah. They're sitting there
Or you
with
think
like,
that they live at school.
Right.
Yeah.
See them when you get there, they're there when you leave. And then you come back the next day and they're already there.
You see your teacher outside, you're like, what the fuck?
But
They
the
let you
parent
out?
actually goes into the pattern of when they were in school talking to their teacher.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it really just comes down to the education point. But then when the revenge of the ego comes, it's like really about, it's like, just to wrap up the point, it's like, so you get taken to this height and then everything is pulled out from underneath you. It's taken away. You go into fear of loss more. You go into blame, frustration, and so forth. And instead of changing your starting point, you just go back into seeking for that again. So the revenge of the ego is really important to understand for those of us who are supporting ourselves to stand up in this world and support others and support the system to change, support ourselves to change, that when we go through these periods of revenge of the ego, we have to understand your mind is going to try to make you feel that the thing you did to stand up, to change yourself, to change the system is the way, is the cause, is the blame. Like it's going to make you think that you being with this particular other person is the source of your problems.
Right. Yeah.
Instead of realizing it was your starting point in terms of what you were like, what you're not in a process of change. You're not in a process of understanding how to remove, like Avery has this really good analogy. It says like you're digging a hole. And people don't realize you're digging the hole until you hit rock bottom. So when you start to feel like you're getting into revenge of the ego, or maybe don't recognize it as that, you start going into blame, you don't realize like you're still purifying the points within yourself that if you were president today, you would just fuck it up. You would just be like everybody else. You would go back into that.
Yeah.
You know, if you had 3 kids right now, you'd end up just fucking abusing all of them emotionally, whatever, because you wouldn't stick to the principles. You know, you would allow other people to influence them. You would just give them the Disney. You would make the compromises, whatever the point is, because you would compromise. You would say, well, you know, it doesn't really matter. Like, come on, Disney's not that bad. Like people exaggerate, like you'll start going into all these excuses and excuses and excuses. And that will be an automatic outflow of you not standing clearly within the point.
Yeah.
So even when revenge of the ego comes, It's like, okay, breathe. First of all, do the forgiveness. Stop blaming. Let's actually direct the point and say, what are we here to do? What is our purpose? And is it going to be the most difficult, challenging thing any of us have ever done or conceived of doing? Obviously. But I mean, let me ask you guys, what else do you want to do? Is there going to be something easier?
No.
It wouldn't matter.
Is there going to be something easier that's just,
I have
just
to
gonna, everything's
delude
just going to be
myself.
amazing and great all the time?
No.
What?
No, I was just saying I'd have to delude myself. Like whatever I
Oh.
decide to do other than this, it would just be like I'd have to start lying to myself of like, oh, this is what's actually best, especially with all the knowledge that I've gained to what I know now. It's like, no, this is what makes the most sense because it has common sense to it. So if I just did anything differently, it would be an abuse. Could be continuing abuse. It would be continuing my own self-abuse and then my own self-interest, and to continue the system. And then what am I actually leaving for my children and everyone else's children for the next generation? Right.
Yeah.
So,
Well said. Drake, any other points before we wrap it up?
You brought up this point, and it just made me think the Little Mermaid is a tool, just the outrage that people feel towards this Little Mermaid.
Everyone's talking about the Little Mermaid's race, but I'm like, but what about Sebastian? That's what I want to know. What race are they going to make Sebastian?
That's a great question, actually, because originally he sounded like he was Jamaican, maybe some islander, some Caribbean, and now since we're doing race flip-flops, he's got to be like Irish or something,
like a leprechaun.
Yeah, like that would.
Top of the morning to you, laddies. Like,
it's the only thing that makes sense, actually. But
and the chef, when they're trying to chop him up, remember that part?
Yeah,
he's like, it's like Gordon Ramsay.
That'd be perfect, actually. That would be ideal.
All right.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. You guys know where to find us in the Facebook group, Facebook Self Perfected. And obviously this is about walking this process. And so if you're facing Revenge of the Ego right now, listen to this podcast again and go listen to Revenge of the Ego, the actual audio by Bernard Pullman. And
especially if you're walking through relationship points where like you're trying to get out, like you see the women or men, they're like, my partner doesn't do this. It's like blame. It's like, how do you find the point of principle and really start from that within yourself and go back into it? Yeah, sorry, I know I interrupted, but
that's good.
That's a really big one for people. All right, we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, everybody.
See ya. Bye.
See ya.